I'd like to call to order the October 12th meeting of the Conestoga Valley School Board. Notice that all are in attendance except for Ms. Martin. If you could all please join me with the pledge to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome everyone tonight. Welcome to anyone who is participating online, watching us here tonight. Board, I need a motion to approve our agenda tonight.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Any board comments tonight? All right. Dr. Z, any comments from you tonight?
Just one, Mr. President. I was fortunate on Sunday to attend the Eagle Scout ceremony for John Oshland, a recent graduate. It was scheduled for May, but obviously we were a little tied up in May, so they had it on Sunday. So on behalf of myself and the board, I read a proclamation signed by you, Mr. President, and myself. It was a great ceremony, a great young man, and a wonderful family. So congratulations to John Oshland.
All right. This is the first time in our meeting for public comments. Any comments from the public tonight? I didn't think we saw anybody come in, so with that, we're going to continue, and we're going to start with Phyllis.
So the first, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like I'm on, but I guess I am. The first item on the agenda for discussion tonight related to the projects is the right-of-way with PP&L. It's really not going to take a lot of time unless you have questions. It's a standard PP&L agreement to get the right-of-way for the new pole that they're going to put in for the middle school property. The drawing shows you both the proposed one and where the existing ones are, shows you where the proposed transformer is going to go, and then the underground conduit that's coming in to connect one to the other. So I did run it by the solicitor just to make sure that there wasn't anything on it. It's pretty simple, obviously. It's only one page, so it will be on consent for you to approve next week. Unless you have questions, in which case I'll get you answers. No? Okay. And then I'm going to turn the next part of the presentation for the next three items over to Murata Main. Who's going first, Wes?
Okay, so I have a few items today. I have a change order for the electrical duct bank. That is to add concrete to the duct bank, which is a standard PP&L detail, which was admitted from the electrical detail. I also have a credit associated with the electrical work, which is that the owner will be providing data racks, 2 data racks for the school. That is in association with the Brownstown work, and we're extraneous in that work, I should say. We can go back, and if you guys have questions on it, you can certainly answer them, but I just want to give you a summary overall. And then finally, there's a collection of 4 civil change orders related to unforeseen conditions that we found while excavating the site. 3 sinkholes and 1 buried trash pile that had to be obviously excavated and filled in. I do have Sergio here from Alvin Engineering. He's the electrical engineer. As you've seen, the big one is the duct bank. So if you have any questions associated with that, him or I can answer those.
Yeah, I have a question. So why was it not on the drawing? Because you know that that's a PP&L issue. You know it has to be on the drawing. So why are we paying $30,000 extra to get this done when it should have been on the drawing to begin with?
You'll have to speak in the mic.
Unfortunately, it was just a miscoordination on our part. We didn't reach out to them as much as we should have.
And so now we're going to pay $38,000 because you made a mistake?
The omission was of the concrete encasement. Fortunately, it was an omission, but it would have been part of the design anyway.
So I understand that, but they already gave the price. So who didn't put it in like it was supposed to be put in? You guys or Marauder Man?
We did.
Okay, so it seems to me like there should be somebody held accountable for a $38,000 change order when we expect our architect and our engineer to put everything on the drawing to begin with, and then you tell me you omit something, and now you want me to pay $38,000 because you omitted it. So that doesn't make much sense to me. So I'm not going to approve this change order.
I'm right there with you, John, because that was my concern. I have heard too often, been told that, well, if we'd have put it in originally, you'd have paid for it anyhow, which sort of ducks the issue. I'm happy errors and omissions should not be our responsibility. My other question is on the bid itself. It says the pricing is good only for the date of issue. Does that mean this number could change?
I noticed that too, and I've asked the GC. He said that's something they've been putting on all their forms since COVID started. He's standing by the price. I'm not sure why that's just something they're doing.
But it does allow them to change the price.
Theoretically, yes.
You will let us know if there's a change.
Certainly, and I will note that we have our construction manager monitoring the site right now and verifying against. You'll notice in the summary that the electrical was presented as a cost not to exceed. So if we can go back and show that they're using less concrete, for example, or less ties, we will certainly do that.
That's great. I understand that, but I still think it's ridiculous that we're paying $38,000 because someone else made a mistake and not us.
On the sinkholes, are all the sinkholes related to the trash pits?
Those are separate. The sinkholes were opened up at various areas of the site. The trash pit was near the former barn, you'll remember.
Yeah.
So we think it was obviously associated with
And I had a little bit of trouble separating. How many sinkholes are there and how many trash pits are there?
There's one trash pit and 3 sinkholes
One trash pit, okay.
that we've discovered so far, but I don't think we'll find any more trash pits.
Oh, we always think that.
Yes.
All right, board, any more questions? All right, thanks, guys. Matt, you next?
So, question, are they going to be on consent agenda next time?
They're on consent, but we can pull that one off.
I'm sorry, on the, can we also address the petition at the Brownstown? Is
That's
that
what-
yours too?
That's what he's coming to talk about.
Oh, okay.
Good evening. I'm here to update the board on the final numbers for the already approved not-to-exceed change order cost for the operable partition revision for 11 operable partitions. As you see, the not-to-exceed number was $163,113.38. After going back and forth, mostly on the masonry infills and reviewing and tracking everything time and material, we were able to get the cost in at $33,572.60, which is a 20.58% of the not-to-exceed cost. To date, with this change order to date, we are, with approved change orders, we're at 0.11%, and with the allowances, we're at negative 1.52% with the project. And, with the delay of COVID, 30 days, the original date of final completion was October 12th. I think we're in line to be complete here in 30 days, minus punch list items, things of that nature.
That's quite a difference from the original estimate.
Yes, ma'am.
Are these the same doors, the same equipment, the same mechanism?
Yes.
And the estimate was that far off?
Believe it or not, yes, that can happen with contractors. I think their eyes get a little big sometimes, and that's why we elected to go time and material. And we did really watch them closely. And we pushed back on, again, the masonry infills because we felt that cost was extremely high from the get-go. And that's how we were able to get this to where it was. As you'll notice, we did get some credits as well. We got credits from going to a different modern fold as opposed to quick wall. We got some reduction in some aluminum glazing, and we got some reduction in some deleted steel in 4 locations that we were able to discover during the course of the project.
That's much better than a $38,000 increase.
I would agree.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, it's better than the 38, but it still was in addition to the original
Understood.
bid.
Yeah, but, I mean, change orders coming in at that low of
That low of a
percentage.
foot, yeah, that's right.
That's
Yeah,
pretty
absolutely.
good, but
All right, Phyllis.
Okay, so the first item I'm going to talk about is the budget calendar. And so for the benefit of newer board members, at this October meeting, we lay out a calendar, which it seems a little silly that we've just started the 2021 school year, and here we are already talking about 21-22. But the dates for the way we need to do the budget are related to the primary election in May, and you have to back up from there. So we try to get this in front of you early so that if there are any changes or adjustments that you want to make or decision points that we need to address, that we can do that. The column H is really a count backwards from that primary election date. So it's a little complicated if you look at the law and you try to read, this has to happen so many days prior and that has to happen so many days prior. So I put the date count on there. This is the second year we've used this new budget calendar format. And so it just, for my purposes, it proves out that we have the right number of days. And for your purposes, if you ever try to go back and take a look at that, it's a little easier to follow than trying to count them yourself if you were so inclined to do that. So starting at the top, one of the first things that I give to you is, Dr. Z, if you could just come up to the top a little bit more, is the base index. So PDE did release the index in the Pennsylvania Bulletin, 3% for the 2021-22 school year. For those of you who may not remember, CV does not get an adjusted index. We only get the base index. So if you hear other neighboring districts talking about an adjusted index, ours is just the base at 3%. And then you can kind of follow down column D and sort of see the items that we'll be hitting as we go through our budget review process, certain things that we hit at certain times of the year. November, we usually look at debt. December, we look at some economic projections. There's an organization at the state level called the Independent Fiscal Review Office that usually releases some economic numbers about that time of year. So it's a good time to look at those. And a good precursor to getting into the meat of the budget. And then starting, so we're not in, even though the president will be elected in the 2020 year, we'll be out of the presidential cycle by the time we get to the May primary. So our budget, if you remember, we had to do this early last year, kind of goes back to a more normal pattern now for 3 years. So we'll be looking at some preliminary budget numbers in January instead of December. And then the deadline that we have to approve the preliminary budget is the middle of February. And so one of the placeholders there is we actually have to put tax collection rates in place in that February timeframe. There's not a specific date for that. So I was toying around with, do we do that on the first meeting in February or the second meeting in February? We can adjust that going forward, but in order to try to keep it lined up with the preliminary budget, we have it in for the February 8th meeting at this point. So that's kind of one highlight that's a little bit different. And then once we have the preliminary budget passed, believe me, that is not where we stop. We do a lot of work in that February to March, March to April timeframe, and then come back to you again with staffing. We just have a better idea of what retirements might be on the table, what enrollment looks like. In a normal year, not a COVID year, we get our first look at some kindergarten numbers, and so we're normally able to make some staffing, at least recommendations, in April. And then once we get into May and June is where we sort of really dive into the passing of the new budget for the year. So we do have a June 30th deadline for that. And again, if you look at those dates over in, or those timestamps over in column H, you can see that we actually have 35 days between the proposed final and the adoption of the final budget. You have to have 30 days. So this year, we can actually do both at the second meeting of the month. We have had it in the past where we've had to do the proposed final budget, at the first May meeting, and then do the adoption of the final budget at the second June meeting, because we just didn't have enough days between the meetings. And then the other two times that you can see on there is we have to publish the budget 20 days in advance, kind of lay it public to give folks, taxpayers, a chance to take a look at it. We also do that going into the preliminary budget. So we give people an opportunity to see the preliminary budget that same way. And then there has to be 10 days in there before the adoption of the final budget as well. So when it's actually published. So we're hitting all those benchmarks. The one thing I forgot to mention, I apologize, Dr. Z, if you want to scroll back up, is we did talk about community forums. So this year we're proposing November. We not knowing kind of what our capacity numbers would look like for a meeting. I just kind of left it to be determined at this point. But we could have a community forum in November. We can have some discussions about whether or not you want to do that, and if you do, what kind of topics we could cover. And then if we scroll down, we actually moved the spring community forum, which is the one that tends to be budget related, to the February timeframe. The last time we were kind of in this cycle, we actually did it in March, but I prefer to do it in February because I like that it lines up prior to the adoption of the preliminary budget and gives folks a chance to come and hear that presentation and react to it. But certainly, it's not my calendar, it's your calendar, so if you'd rather us do it in March or April, it's your choice, just let us know, and we can sort of adjust this calendar as need be. So apologize, I went through that a little bit more detailed than I normally do, but with some new faces, want to make sure everybody kind of understands what we're doing. This will also go on for consent next week, so there's no action to be taken tonight. But if you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Nope, okay.
Keep going.
So the bad news is you're stuck with me for a couple of agenda items here, so we'll just have to keep moving. So my next item should be, the enrollment. So the bad news with this one was you were going to get a joint presentation with Dr. Mann and I, but Dawn's not able to be here, so if I can't answer some of the specific questions about cyber or some of those things, you'll just have to bear with me. I'll take notes and we'll certainly get back to you. So if you, so enrollment. Normally this presentation, again, some new faces, so I want to kind of slow down and back up and explain what this is. This presentation is usually enrollment projections. So we take a look at, well, let me start with, the Department of Education requires us to take a snapshot. It's called the October 1 snapshot, which is a count of all the students in the district, and submit that information to them. So October is kind of an appropriate time for us to take those numbers and look at them as well. My understanding is not every district does enrollment projections, but fortunately the district that I came from, in this district, we've always done this. So I think it's helpful to stay on top of it and kind of keep an idea of the pulse of where kids are moving within and without or outside of the district. The reason we didn't call it projections this year is obviously this year is a little different. And so the purpose, two purposes of projections. The purpose that PDE has with it is to be able to say how many students are enrolled in this school district. The local purpose that we have is certainly we're interested in that number, but we're also more worried about it from a capacity standpoint. So I kind of call that the butts in seats number. How many kids do we have actually sitting in seats in CV? So if you think about it, there are, and I'll show you some in the presentation, or at least talk about them, there are kids that are enrolled in CV, but might not be sitting in one of our buildings for a variety of reasons. And so, we're interested again in that enrollment number, but want to make sure that we have adequate space for all the kids that we're going to actually have in our buildings. So the way we do that in the much longer presentation is we look at it on both a 5-year trend, so sort of a shorter term look, and then we look at a 10-year trend and look at a longer term look. So the 5-year trend, we sort of know, because I'm going to show you, we're following births within the 3 municipalities that send students into Conestoga Valley School District. We can sort of, not to a T, but we can kind of track that and see a trend. So we can still take a look at those numbers. We can also take a look at building permit numbers and see what residential housing that we have in our district. The changeover of the housing's a little bit hard because we can't always tell that grandma and grandpa sold a house to a family, and now that family either moves in with children or moves in and is going to have children. But we can certainly see the capacity of the residential housing within our district. And so those 5-year and 10-year trends, and then we look at them on 2 different types of averages. We do a 2-year average and a 4-year average, just to try to get some numbers and kind of tease out what might be happening. So with COVID, thinking about that, if we take, when I show you what the numbers look like for the students that are actually in seats in CV in our buildings, those numbers are obviously, as Dr. Z even showed you last month, much lower than they've been. So we're going to put a number in that's going to be, a placeholder. It's not maybe a real number, maybe not a real number. I mean, we think many of those students are coming back, once sort of the pandemic subsides. But we don't know that. There may be some that don't. So you don't want to put a number that's not a known number into that column and then have that drive projections, because it'll obviously skew them and drive projections in a way that we don't want to make decisions on, because they could be in error. So in kind of talking about it internally, we decided that we're going to kind of cut out some of the projection stuff, but still wanted to go through the enrollment pieces with you and kind of show you what's out there. So the way we normally start, thank you, Dr. Z, is with the births. And as I mentioned, we take a look at the 3 townships and kind of how many births happened. And so the number this year, 452, is actually much lower than it's been the last couple of years. And as you can see, it's been, I think it was 2006 was the last time we had a number that low. And so what I do on this chart is once I plug the new number in, which is the last blue bar, I can then set the trend line, and I can play with those outlier numbers that are in that sort of maroon color. And kind of, it's really just sort of literally playing with it to try to make those numbers make sense in context of the numbers to the left, the blue numbers, without putting your trend line kind of out of whack. So those numbers might look a little bit lower than maybe you think they would be, but a lot of it's about looking at the averages and kind of seeing where we are. So I can tell you that, just as an example, in the last 10 years, the average has been about 504 births each year. And then if you take, so again, I mentioned that 2006 was the last year we were in the 450 range. If you kind of take the 10 years around that number, that average was about 490. So you can see that overall we are higher, so those numbers will probably come back up. Just how they will is sort of yet to be determined. So then the next piece we look at, as I mentioned, are the residential building permits. And you know, I don't need to tell all of you that there's not a lot of residential activity in our district. As a matter of fact, we've hired some people, and they've wanted to move into the district and kind of had a hard time finding a place to move into. But there are a couple that we're watching. We've been watching Devon's Creek for a while. They did get their well for the water approved by DEP. So phase 2 of that is 60 apartments and then 50 to 60 single-family duplex townhouse units. I really just kind of took a guess and kind of split them across the 2 years. Obviously, the municipalities look at this on a calendar year basis, and I'm looking at it on a school year basis, so I'm always kind of trying to adjust with those numbers. Down further in the page, kind of right above the total for East Lampeter, you're going to see Greenfield. So there are modulars that are being put in over in Greenfield. It's about 90 of those. That's sort of a long-term plan, so I think I spread those out over 5 years. And then the other outlier that's down at the bottom of the page is Market Square South, which is Upper Laycock Township, which is going in across from Funk's, if you know where I mean, off 23. Sort of back behind the Rudders there. And they're underway. They didn't, with COVID, get as many started in 2020 as I think they were planning, but hopefully going to pick that up through this year and into next year, and looking at about 20 apartments, or I'm sorry, 20 single families and about 100 apartments there. So the other thing I'll tell kind of newer board members is, if you're sort of thinking, well, if it's 100 and 200 and 300, maybe it's 300 across the next 5 years, oh my goodness, we need to go add some capacity, because every house or every apartment's going to bring 2.5 kids, and it's going to kind of have this explosion. The numbers actually tend to go the other way, so you actually tend to have like 3 houses to get a kid, because some people don't have kids or are older, and their kids are grown. And so the numbers move in actually the opposite direction, and then when you spread them out over 13 grade levels, you typically don't see big pockets coming in, even with a growth of 200 or 300 homes. And as I mentioned, it's over really a 5-year period. So we should have some ability, and especially with the birth rate being lower, to be able to absorb some of that. One of the other things I should have mentioned that I do when we look at the projections is I also compare the elementary buildings building to building. So you can kind of see, like, do we have space in one building and not in another? Obviously, we didn't do that again this year because the numbers are low enough, it just kind of doesn't seem to make sense to do that. So then just a snapshot, and I did, the next 2 charts are 1920 and then the next one's 2021. So just tried to show you how close we were to our projections. So obviously this one's 1920. When we looked at it, we were projecting 4122, came in at 4100 at the end of the year. So pretty close there. And then the next one does the same thing for 2021. Kind of the difference that I did there was I pulled CVVA out of those numbers. And I'll dive in and show you a little bit more detail on that in a minute. But you can kind of see where we were at 4,200, being projected to be at 4,200, which was about 100 more than where we were at the end of what I showed you for 1920. And then, if you put the CVVA numbers in, coming in lower than that for this year. And certainly you see the big gap with the CVVA students not in. I had mentioned, so if you compare the 4,100 or the 4,200, whichever number you pick, to what you're going to see, PDE, the Department of Ed, actually publishes all these numbers, and you're going to say, well, wait, we have a 4,300 number. Why is that? It's all those students that I mentioned to you before that are not sitting in a particular seat. So it could be CTC students, full-time CTC students that are seniors. They're not obviously in one of our buildings. A couple of contracted programs. We use the IU, we use Lancaster Academy. We have a couple of students at Stevens. So it just sort of depends on the kid. But with the CTC, it's about 150 kids. Without the CTC, maybe 90 to 100 kids. So they will be off a little bit, those PDE numbers for that reason. And then next, as I promised, showing you just kind of a summary breakdown. And again, Dr. Z had mentioned some of these numbers last month, so some of it's just an update to what we showed you. So we'll kind of keep this going as long as you want to see it, so you can kind of see what's happening. But our question internally was, okay, we know the CVVA, we know we've got kids going to virtual. What does that look like? Obviously, the biggest chunk of it is at the elementary level. So if you looked at that previous slide and started going through K through 6 grade levels and thinking, wow, those numbers are really down, yeah, it's because it's 377 kids across those grade levels, so it's pretty easy to see and add up. The cyber numbers, so cyber numbers are outside cyber charter schools. So kids obviously not in our virtual academy, but in a cyber program with a for-profit entity. And you can see we've had a big jump there as well. And I'll talk about that, what that means and why that's important from a financial side, both the CVVA and the cyber in a minute. And then lastly, we kept looking at the numbers and thinking, we're still short some kids. Where did those kids go? And when we went to Kara, who is our child accounting person, and started diving into the details, we have about 100 more students that are being homeschooled this year. So whether that continues through the end of the year, we have to give the snapshot to PDE on October 1st, but we always like to look at it at the end of the year too and kind of see, what happened. Is it still the same numbers, or did things change during the year and maybe the numbers look a little bit different?
Can I just ask quickly?
Sure.
There's homeschool. Do you have any breakdown? Is that mostly younger kids who maybe the parents don't like having in front of a screen that much?
The additional ones or across the district?
Either way.
I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't know if Kelly, maybe, no, we're going to have to ask.
I know that's a
Dr. Mann.
common reason why some go to homeschooling, but not to another cyber school. And I just wondered if that's what it was.
What I can tell you about our homeschool numbers is obviously not looking at this year, but starting with last year, if you go back 7 years, that number is ridiculously consistent. It really, the average is about 190, and it's really a narrow band. I mean, it doesn't move much between 180 and 190.
And the move over often comes at the beginning of middle school or the beginning of high school, where the coursework is sometimes more than parents want to handle for advanced courses or more complex courses. That's why I wondered if this was mostly elementary.
Yeah, and I can tell you that is, so we do see movement kind of going from 6th to 7th, and we do see movement going from 8th to 9th. How much of that's homeschool versus private school? I mean, we have parochial kids and, private school kids that move at those times too. So I just don't have that breakdown for you. So I wanted to talk just a little bit, because the money part is sort of my wheelhouse, what it means to us financially. So one of the things you're going to see, and Mr. Smucker and I were talking about kind of coming back and kind of showing you, here's the additional funding that we received, and here's how we intended to spend it when we talked to you through the budget process, and here's what we're actually getting and how we're finding that we're spending it. It's not dramatically different, but there are a couple of places where we're finding that, fortunately, we didn't need some money in some places where we had planned for it, because we found some other places where it's going to be used. And one of those is our virtual academy. So we do still have to pay for curriculum and to K-12, the vendor that we use, to make sure that program runs. And so that's going to be a big number. It's going to be a couple $100,000 number. And then the other piece is, as I mentioned, going from 40s to 70s on the cyber charters, we pay a lot more to send those same kids out to an outside cyber charter than doing it ourselves. And these are the new numbers. So $11,500 is the regular ed tuition rate, $26,000 is the special ed tuition rate. So you can see when we're moving from 40 or 45 students to 70 students, now part of it's how many are in each bucket, but still, that's also going to be a couple of $100,000 as well. And then the next piece, for those of you who've been on the board, you know this, but for newer folks, so one of sort of the balancing acts of that was when the charter school law went into place, the state actually put some money aside for it and said, you're going to pay this, but we're going to subsidize part of that, and we're going to give you basically a reimbursement back. And that ended in the 2010-2011 fiscal year at the state level. And so we have really been footing the bill for those kids for the past 10 years. So that obviously affects us as well. Now on the cyber level, the good news to that, even though 70 sounds like a lot when you're moving from 40, what I will tell you is if you go back and kind of look at the history in, it was the 12-13, 13-14, 14-15 years, we were at that same 69, 70, 72 number. And the board, as one of the board goals, really took it on that we're going to try to drive that number down and make sure that, families need to make the decision they're making, but if there's an opportunity for us to make sure those kids are in our cyber program, in our virtual academy, instead of out at one of these other ones, that we were going to try to make sure that that happened to bring them back. We were able to do that. The numbers came down. We were down in the low 30s at one point. So even though having a number over 70, and it is, the only warning I'll give you is it is a little bit early. Sometimes what happens with the cyber charters is we're early in the year and we may see some billing coming in and that number pick up yet. But two positives. One, we're in better shape compared to some of our neighboring districts. And two, we're at a number that we've been at before. We're not dramatically higher than that. So if there's any sort of good news to that. And these are just the cyber numbers. So a lot of times people will ask, well, do we have kids in a brick and mortar charter school? And we do, but it's a handful. It's 4 or 5. So I didn't even really break those out and show that number. And then this chart is just the graphical depiction, so you can see the dramatic increase in both the cyber students, that's the 70, and then the 100 homeschoolers. And this is a chart that I've shown you every year, so it's sort of a good depiction of what that looks like graphically. And then now I'm going to go through a couple of slides that I can explain to you, but really they're Dr. Mann's slides, so I'll try to do my best here, and maybe Dr. Z will help me if I get stuck. But really, hopefully pretty simple stuff, just taking the Virtual Academy students at the elementary level and kind of breaking them down so you can see it by grade level. So I think that one's pretty simple. And then the next one kind of focused on middle school. And I'm sure you recall, middle school and high school is where we also have the real-time virtual. So I wanted to break those out because they're in the regular numbers as well, not obviously in the Virtual Academy numbers. So we're only showing about 25 students in the Virtual Academy at the middle school, and then as Dr. Z went through last month, you can see the RTV numbers at the middle school. And then the next slide, which should be the last one, then focuses on the high school. So again, seeing the total number of CVVA students, and then Dawn gave you the breakdown so you could see by grade level, and then the real-time virtual students, and again, the breakdown by grade level there. So that's, in a nutshell, what we thought we would share with you, sort of a combination of Dr. Mann's cyber charter presentation that he does and pieces of my enrollment presentation that I normally do. And we will certainly, once we feel like we know what kids are coming back, sort of go back and plug those numbers in and start those projections going forward. Again, we're not going to walk away from that, but it just seemed like it wasn't particularly useful information to share at this point, so we thought we'd do something a little different. So if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them, and if not, I think you're stuck with me for the next item as well.
I would guess that, well, we don't know who's coming back. If you ask, probably the parents don't know yet either. Understandably.
Okay. So I think that's that for that, and I think we're doing policy next? Yep. So Ken is here. Ken's here, and he'll help me with these. So obviously 700 policies are in the property section, so Ken and I have been working on these policies together. 704 is a little bit easier than 705, so hopefully this one won't, even though it's got a lot of marks on it, won't be too cumbersome. Again, pulling some ideas from some other PSBA policies that we researched. And a lot of this is some title changes and things like that. But a couple of things that we thought we would like to add to this policy that we found in some other policies. And one was making sure that we had documented things that we're already doing. So we already sort of try to make sure that, you know, as part of the maintenance program, not only are we looking at long-range planning and, you know, making sure we have a preventive maintenance program in place for big pieces of equipment, but also making sure that we have spare parts for critical stuff so that we're not, you know, waiting for an Amazon delivery to get something back up and running, or making sure that, you know, some of the smaller equipment, I'm thinking back to when I first started, we were finding, you know, floor scrubbers and things that the custodians were using were not in the best shape. So trying to make sure we get a program in place for those kinds of things. And then just making sure we're looking at the buildings and we have a good checklist to do that. So we did add a section specifically for that. And then one of the other things that we found in some of the sample policies, which again, we do this, is we come to you, Ken meets with the building principals and other department heads, usually in the November timeframe. So that's on the budget calendar. And then we usually come to you in December and say, here's kind of what we think we need to keep things moving along and to keep all of our property and our equipment in good shape. And we show you costs for that. We prioritize them for you. So, you know, we thought we could have said Ken or me or both, but with superintendent or designees just kind of generally seem to fit that description. And since we do that, we thought we would capture that as something that, you know, is a good idea, a good government practice that we should be doing. So again, not a lot of changes to 704 other than the titles, job titles not being correct. Any questions on that one? And for whatever reason, when we did the 700s the last time, which I think was in either 13-14 or 14-15, we didn't touch this policy. So this one has been since 2009. So sort of time to brush it off. And again, not dramatic changes to it. Maintenance sort of is what it is. 704, on the other hand, we did look at the last time. And so it was another example like we had last month, although we knew it was coming now, where the policy that was originally sent to PSBA was not the correct one. So thank you to Mrs. Martin, Denise Martin, not Diane Martin, for cleaning this up and kind of getting us to where we needed to be. We sort of made, this one looks like kind of a mess, like we did a lot to it, but it's really 3 categories of things. So where Dr. Z is in the policy right now in the safety program, the language that we're adding there comes from a PSBA policy sample that we pulled down that was approved in September of the district that it came from, that really, if you read it, is obviously intended to kind of capture this COVID mentality that we're in. That, you know, if there is a local health and safety plan, that you've got something that's saying that not only do you have to follow, and it is sort of, you do sort of know that you have to follow local policy, but not a bad idea to say, oh, if you're going to follow the state guidelines and follow any federal policy, federal regulations, you're also going to follow the local board policy as well. So we wanted to make that change, or at least recommend it to you, because again, it was one of the districts that we saw had made updates since we've been in this kind of new environment. And then the next group of changes, Dr. Z, if you just scroll down a little bit. So where we right there, yep. So where we designate the accident and illness prevention and the risk manager, we put sort of this generic sentence in that said, we're going to establish guidelines for the loss prevention program, and then everything that you see after that is really the guidelines. So to Mrs. Graff's point, who's always saying, why do we have these guidelines and policy? Here was a perfect example where we had some really detailed stuff in this policy. I actually took this our policy without this potentially deleted from it and shared it with PMA, who's the workers' comp prevention. They're actually the claims administrator, and if Ken and I want them to come out and look at something, they come out and look at our buildings and will walk the buildings with us. And it's great to have them do that because they have a workers' comp and a loss prevention mind with which they look at things, that they will catch things that we will walk by and not notice because that's not what we do every day. So we utilize them for that as part of the insurance consortium that we're in through the IU. And so one of the people we work with there, I sent it to him and he said the same thing. I thought, I'm not going to tell him to see what he says. And he's like, man, you guys have got a lot of detail in this thing. And then lo and behold, when Mrs. Martin gave us the PSBA policies, nobody has a policy, at least of the ones we looked at, that's this long and this detailed. So our recommendation would be to clean that up and put some of this stuff in guidelines. So we're not going to get rid of it. It's going to go to a different place. And then the very last piece of this, right there, is where we talk about our material, I still want to call them material safety data sheets. They're just called safety data sheets now. Try to stop doing that. Ken, you should have been close enough to kick me. We used to do that in a binder format. In paper, we'd have to pull the papers out, put the new papers in, and you may remember, at least the board members who have been here for a little bit, Ken had come and presented one night a contract with a company to get all of that electronic. So now we can change it in one place, and the people that need to have access to it, and we're not doing this binder swap. And so we took all of this language out that's really dealing with, how we're going to make sure we have these binders and the files and the people or responsibility for changing them and updating them, because it all happens through the electronic system now. So that was the other big change we made. Again, not deleting this because we're getting rid of anything, just deleting it because we're now using an electronic process instead of the paper binder process.
I knew you were thinking of me when you got rid of all those guidelines. And I am pleased, but now I'm going to take the other side of this discussion. No, I agree with taking it out. However, taking it out should not eliminate review.
Okay.
Okay? I've often talked about, is there some place where all these guidelines live?
Mm-hmm.
And possibly there is not, except within each department. And at some point, you have to make sure that, since we don't have them all in policy where they never belong, they at least got reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, you have to have a policy that just says we will review guidelines.
Dr. Z, is that part of, so we purchased the administrative guideline or administrative regulation, I guess is the more proper term for it, service from PSBA to go with the policy service. Is there a review process with that they recommend? Do you know?
They do, and what they do is when you first start with them, they take a look at our regulations, our policies, not our policies, our procedures, and make it easier to implement
Okay.
at the building and district level. But they do organize that for us, and they take our forms, and they do take a look at them.
Okay.
But they should be updated regularly as we use them.
I can tell you that one of the things that, now that we're part of that service, so when PSBA used to send out the Policy News Network, they would kind of give you changes to policies. because we're part of the admin regulation piece, they also give us any changes to admin regs that they're
Yep.
recommending.
So I don't know if things like that, like this, fall under that.
This would.
Okay, but just in general, I like having guidelines where they can be adjusted and updated practically by the people that work with them, but we have to be sure they're also reviewing them. So that wasn't as bad as you thought of what I was going to say.
Well, and you're right, we may need to put a policy in place that says we're going to review the admin regs every however many years. I mean, we sort of have a cycle for the way we do these policies. The district that I came from, God love the superintendent, we hadn't reviewed policy in years, and he made it a goal of his, he was going to do it the last year, and before he retired, and he did. And I can't imagine doing all of this in 1 year, but that's what happens when you don't do it on a cycle, is you then sort of get behind and have to do it all at once. But any other questions, comments?
Oh, I had just one question.
Yep.
There's a line in there under number 1 that talks about inspections. I just got out of it, so I'll have to get
Okay.
back in it. Up near the top, where you have them numbered. I'm in the wrong place. What number am I on?
Keep going up. Maybe it's
Maintenance, safe. I must have accidentally. Give me just a second and I'll find it for you. I'm sorry.
no, the other-
Safety Task Force Committee, 1, performing safety inspections of school buildings and grounds, partnering with district staff or other parties.
Can you give me?
705.200, right up at the
200.
top.
Okay, let's look at it. Yep, at the top.
Okay. I always tend to look at policies as if I'm someone in the community trying to read our policies.
Right.
Other parties would make me think, oh, I could go along. Would you please make that other qualified parties?
Sure.
Just to make sure we understand that we're not opening up inspections to anyone that thinks they're an interested party.
Correct. And what we're really referring to there is the thing I just described to you with Tim coming in and
Yes.
walking the buildings and the playgrounds.
And I
with
think
us.
I think
So we
just
can
making
say
that
other
qualified
qualified-
parties
oh, yeah.
tightens that up just a little.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, we can do that. Anybody else? Nope. Okay, then. I think I'm finally done.
Dr. Z.
Yep. All right, I just pulled up 448.1. U.S. Department of Education announced this rule on May 6th of 2020. It's a Title IX update focusing on new protections against sexual harassment. And this policy is a result of that rule. If you remember, a couple months ago, we came to you with an agreement with Fox Rothschild. All the districts in the IU were working with him since this was a statewide mandate, and the IU, or actually a federal mandate, and the IU got together, worked with Fox Rothschild to help develop policy, procedures, and materials in order for all of the districts to be compliant with the rule. We went through this policy. There were some CV specifics that we had to make decisions. I worked with the solicitor, Mr. Frankhauser, on that, so he also did review this policy.
I have one question. I went through this and couldn't find any reference to the Safe to Say program, and I wondered if it shouldn't have been referenced or included. Or is it somewhere in another policy?
No, that is a procedure that's a procedure that we'll be using. We're not putting that in the policy because Safe to Say is just a tool for administration to implement this policy. So when we're working on the procedures right now, so that when this is approved for second reading, we'll have our administrative procedures. Safe to Say is in that procedure document.
I just think it's important for anyone looking for how to handle this to have that information readily available.
And it is readily available for the administrators.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Second one, let me click back and forth real quick. Is our new social media policy. Kendall was working on this towards the end of the last year. And then as life happened and Kendall moved on, Katie came right in and picked up where Kendall left off. We had compared the policy on social media with PSBA policies as well as other districts. And what you see is the final product. We're also finishing up the guidelines that are to be rolled out upon approval of the second reading. And these guidelines will be rolled out to not only administration, but to faculty and staff as well, because they're using social media on a daily basis. This delineates between what is district social media, what is personal social media, and then what is third-party social media. So it's all encompassed in this one policy. The guidelines are probably what the teachers and the administrators, they really care about. What can and can't I do?
I had some concerns about this third-party media account, social media. It says that they are working on behalf of a recognized club or organization in the district. And it seems to me that if they're doing it on behalf of one of our organizations, they should have the same policies as opposed to the sort of wishy-washy, it's expected they will, be positive. I think they're the same as if it's the actual advisor, be that a paid or non-paid advisor from staff. I think they should be held to the same standards and guidelines. If they're not doing it on behalf of the club and they want complete freedom to put whatever they want on social media, they should be doing that in their personal account.
The difficulty is they are an outside organization.
I'm sorry.
The difficulty is they're an outside organization, and for us to police an outside organization is the difficulty. It's the enforcement of the policy as it applies to someone that is not an employee of the district. So what we're asking these third-party people is to follow these guidelines. The trouble comes on the enforcement side.
Then I guess my problem comes with recognizing who's doing this on behalf of the organization. If they're doing it individually about the organization, that's one thing. But on behalf of the organization suggests it's official.
On the behalf of the organization, that's where we can reach out and say, we're asking you to follow these. If you just set up your own, and I'm saying I'm a third party and I'm going to do the boys soccer team, and whatever I put is just on Dave's soccer, whatever, format. I have no control over what I'm doing, but if I'm saying that I'm the booster club for the boys soccer team, then I'm going to ask the booster club to go ahead and follow these rules and guidelines. So there is a level of accountability, more so than if it was an individual on their own.
Do a lot of our activities and organizations have a social media account that's more connected with us?
I believe, Katie, all of them do, correct?
They do. The official process is they have to request to create a social media account.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I'm too short to see it. So the difference is that they have to request a social media account on behalf of the district, and those requests come straight to my office. And that's where they're held to our guidelines and our standards. If it's an offshoot, they don't have to request an access through my office, and they are essentially free to do as they want. Yes, we encourage them to follow our guidelines and our policies, but because it's not a CV approved account, we can't actually monitor and hold them to those standards and guidelines.
Do they have access to a CV account?
They do not. They have to go through me
Oh,
to
this
set
is,
that up.
okay, this is the only way they can
Yes,
do
They
it.
have to go through my office to do that. And then if
Okay.
they do, they're held to our guidelines and
Do you
standards.
find these people generally are cooperative with
They
you?
are.
Do they come to you
They
for
are,
guidance?
There are several that, we've seen, especially during COVID, where they were not necessarily things that we would have approved because they were not a sanctioned account through the district. all we could do was simply monitor the action. We couldn't actually do anything about it. But most adhere, and they just want to promote their brand.
Give
Are
me
you
exam-
aware of most of them that are out there?
Yes.
Okay.
We have a list especially as well of district-sponsored, and then we hear about sort of the offshoots and monitor those as well.
Can you give me an example of a third party?
We had a couple of parent organizations that are CV, VA parent groups, and they are talking about their experiences in CVVA, but they are not an account that was created through CVVA, or a CVVA teacher did not request an account, simply a group of parents who are discussing their situation and their experiences in CVVA.
But then how would that fall under being an extracurricular group? Like,
Well, so that's a third party, and like that, we,
yeah, but that's what I mean, like, under the third-party social media account, how would a parent group link to CCBA? I guess I wanted to just listen, but I do agree with Idette in that if they are linked to CV in any way, even if it is a volunteer at a minimum, the statement should use stronger language that suggests that.
well, so we have, and it's available online, an application process to apply for an official district.
Yes.
And if they don't do that, we cannot control that.
So is there a way to just say that those things are not affiliated with Conestoga Valley and therefore we're not held responsible? You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
I do agree, because I'm thinking about some things in my gay world, where the language is definitely stronger. People still do it, but then we can take a stronger stand in that. That's
So
not-
we also define at the very beginning what a third-party account is, and it very clearly states it is not operated by a school district or a school district employee or a board member. So we kind of make it clear at the beginning, they do not have an approved affiliation with our district or our approved policies, but they are still free to do as they want. We can't hinder their creation. However, there are approved avenues they can go through to actually have a district-approved account. Most choose not to because they don't want to be monitored.
I'm sorry, most people don't.
Most, those types of offshoot groups don't always want to go through the district because they don't want to adhere to all of those guidelines, and that's their choice.
Those are the ones you watch most closely.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Katie?
All right.
That's it for the policy review.
Yep.
All right, I have the next one. It's the Buckskin Activities Alliance grant application. This is for your approval to release the funds. It's actually Activity Alliance funds, but the check and balance is built in with the alliance is that the board approves the distribution of the funds. We were notified just today that the CastPack company and the program has developed a hardware glitch. So the cast pack, which there's 3 cast packs equaling $6,000, has been removed from this grant application. We are working live streaming with Josh and his tech department, so we'll be able to go ahead and live stream the remaining home football games. That's the one area that we cannot have the fans in the stands. All the other ones, we're allowed to have our max, which I'll go over actually on the next agenda item. But to release the funds, instead of releasing $18,500, the Buckskin Activities Alliance is requesting that that be reduced by $6,000 so that the board will approve the release of $12,500 for them to get the cameras, the microphones, and the data plan. And then I'll need an action item for that,
Any
Mr.
questions,
President.
board?
No, I have no problem with,
Yeah, we need action tonight.
I have no problem with this, but going forward with more and more live streaming going on in various applications, I think we need to somewhere check our policies or create a policy that verifies that anyone on campus has no expectation of privacy. I've worked on that policy with the IU, and I think we should look into the same one.
And that is also part of the social media policy, that you must sign off?
But a lot of schools have started actually putting up signage so that people understand that they may be
On camera.
recorded, photographed.
And again, I don't know if I heard you right, but the people in the stands, they give up their right to privacy to be videotaped because they're attending a public event.
Yeah,
If that's what you said.
Yeah, I just think that's important, especially considering we're talking a lot with minors.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Who owns the copyright to the video?
Who owns the copyright?
Who
We
owns
should
the
own the
copyright?
copyright.
That's a great question, and I do not know the answer. Josh, do you know who owns the copyright to the?
Well, we should own it.
It's inherent under our YouTube account, which is what we're currently streaming, but we can clarify that to make sure. So our content's only viewable on our site.
I move we approve the requested amount for Buckskin Activity Alliance.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Getting to the download on this one.
That's fine.
Board, this is information that I had previously shared with you. Just want to make it public to the community. This is in regards to the governor's updated guidelines for spectators. So effective last Friday, the maximum occupancy for indoor events, if the event can hold 0 to 2,000, not the event, if the facility can hold 0 to 2,000 people, you can go to 20% of maximum capacity for inside. And if the outside occupancy is between 2,001 and 10,000 people, you can again do 20% of the maximum occupancy. But there's the however or the and. The venues must require attendees to comply with 6 feet social distancing requirements, wearing masks, and implementing best practices. Fortunately for us, both Dina and Mike Thornton had been proactive in the way they attacked this, and they have measured out 6 feet distances on all stadium and the real gym bleachers. They have them in pairs because initially we were looking at parents getting tickets so that they were given out in pairs. So when you go to the gym or to the stadium, you'll see 2 CV stickers side by side. That is because people from the same family can sit closer than the 6 feet. Real Gym has a capacity of 1,960. That would be 392 spectators for 20%. However, we did go ahead with the 6-foot guidance, and we can get 312 total. Ueda Gym, Dina and Mike, new Mike, have not yet marked those off. So once that happens for the wrestling, we'll announce those limits as well. The stadium has a capacity of 2,850. That would be 570 spectators. We are actually looking at 308 following the distance guidelines. That does not include the players, cheerleaders, or band members that are on the stadium floor, if you will. So the 308 will allow for family members as well as for some guidelines for the visiting family members as well. Again, that's what I have on the following slide, what it means for CV. It talks about the football field or the football games, all other outdoor contests, the indoor contests. As I mentioned, the winter sports, Dr. Smith and Ms. Henry are working on that. And this is critical, and all superintendents have asked each other to make sure we announce this, that all away contests will follow the guidelines of the home team. So just because we are allowing a certain number does not mean that a neighboring district is allowing that same number. So we do follow the home field guidelines. And this is really just a big thank you during this time. Thank you to the student athletes, band members, the coaches, advisors, directors, and parents for their patient grace, flexibility, and understanding as we navigate these changing guidelines regarding our students' ability to participate in and really to be cheered on at the extracurricular events. Mike and his admin team are looking at maybe the fall play or other concerts and see how that will play out as well. So again, I know I rushed through this a little bit, but board, you've already had this information. I just wanted to make sure that the public received it as well.
Certainly. Any questions, board? And again, I just want to say thanks to Dr. Z, you, and the late Mr. Thornton, well, not late, but no longer here, Mr. Thornton and Dina, for all the work that they put in ahead of time to get us where we're at. So that's good. All right. So, board, you'll see in front of you, the next agenda item is our tentative agenda for next week. You have that. And with that, this is the second time in our meeting for public comments. Again, we don't have anyone here, so we'll continue to move on. Are there any board matters tonight? All right. Hearing none, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.